Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I'm Cullen McFader, and I'm from Toronto, Canada, and this is Clark Coffey joining me from sunny California,
Hello.
Orange County. How are you doing?
Doing all right, man. How are you?
I'm great.
Awesome.
So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and just say a little bit about yourself? And,
okay. Throwing it back over to me. Well, yeah, everybody, you certainly don't know who we are yet, but but we'll tell you a little bit about ourselves so that you kind of have an idea of who we are and where we're coming from as we start our series of podcasts that we're going to basically dedicate to the discussion of Werner Herzog and initially his Masterclass that he's got on Masterclass.com, which Cullen and I both have done and actually met through. And then we'll probably end up discussing his films and his writings, and he's got several books that he's authored. And he's done an endless number of interviews, both in print and on in video. But we're going to kind of use all of that material as a jumping off point to discuss film philosophy, filmmaking, even like creative process, philosophy of art, and maybe even just a little, application to life in general. So a little bit of background about me. Like Cullen said, I'm out here in Orange County, California. I am pursuing a career in filmmaking. I have only been doing so, though, for about 10 years. I'm in my mid-40s, so I started pretty late. I used to work in advertising, didn't like it, felt like it was kind of sucking the soul out of my body, and I had always wanted to be a filmmaker, and I'd always loved film. So I decided to set out to try to be an actor, because that's what I saw on camera, that's what I saw on screen, and that was kind of the most immediately recognizable role in the world of filmmaking for me. And I did that for about like singularly for about 8 years. And boy, do I have some really wacky stories from that experience. But actually, I mean, it was a very great experience. But as I kind of pursued that career in acting more and more and more, I realized, I'm going to have to take on some of these other roles that exist in the world of filmmaking if I'm going to do anything in this industry, instead of just waiting for somebody to invite me to act. I thought, maybe I can start to write my own stuff. Maybe I can direct my own stuff, produce my own stuff, etc., etc. And so more and more I was exposed to these different roles and actually ended up really loving a lot of these things, although writing still scares the crap out of me. But I really love directing, and so I've kind of been putting my energy more towards that. But I'm certainly, I would say in the beginning of my career, but I have written and directed and acted in quite a few performances for the stage, and then over the past, 8 years or so, in front of and behind the camera, from short films to even now recently I am directing and producing a handful of documentary and narrative features that I'm in progress on. So yeah, I don't know. In a nutshell, there's me. Ta-da! Cullen.
Well, yeah, I've got less years than you, but I started. I was interested in film as a kid. I got really interested around the time I was 5 or 6, and I would use the old high-8 video camera that we had at home to make movies. But as a kid, and going even up to high school, I primarily did more acting, kind of similarly to you. And that was not out of a desire to be an actor, but it was more out of, when you're a kid, it's easier to act than it is to make a movie, because, of course, there's a little bit more behind being a director than it is just to, go join a spring play or something like that, or a school play. So
Totally.
I did a lot of acting basically since when I was a kid. I did a lot of improv stuff with like Second City and places like that. And then when I was in high school, I went to a kind of notable arts high school just outside of Toronto. And
You're a fame kid. It's
I took 4 years of like intensive acting school there.
Wow.
But I also knew that I never wanted to be, an actor. I'd acted in a few things and I'd done a lot of stage, but I always wanted to be, behind the camera instead of in front of it. So all that while, as a kid, I was making dozens and dozens of short films. And now I teach a film class I work primarily as like a freelance cinematographer, and I direct a lot of my own stuff. I've got my own company up here in Toronto.
Awesome.
That I make films first or through, and we're actually just gearing up on our first feature now, which is really exciting. That'll be my kind of directorial debut when it comes to feature territory. So excited
Awesome.
about that.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, that's going to be really interesting. Different, kind of different histories, different perspectives that we can kind of bring to this analysis and discussion. It's so interesting that you actually did go to an art school. I did not, and it's really interesting that you teach a film class, because that's a big part of what Herzog discusses here in these first couple lessons that we can jump into. But before we do, I want to draw some attention to the name of our podcast, which is Soldiers of Cinema. And of course, we did not just make that up on our own, as cool as it is, but we got that from Herzog himself. And and he, not just in this masterclass, but if you go back, I think that he's used this phrase quite often, over the past numerous decades. I love it. I think that it's an awesome descriptor of what my hopes would be, or my ideal would be as a filmmaker, what I would hope to achieve would be a soldier of cinema. But what does that mean to you? What do you think Herzog means, and what, if anything, does that mean to you, Cullen?
I mean, on a very basic level, I think it's about not doing anything passively. I think it's about being very active in something that you like, if it's a creative output. And of course, this being specifically about cinema and about film, I think it's about, if you're making something, you're fully invested in it. You are a soldier. You would crawl through the trenches on all fours to get a shot. You would put your heart and soul into the projects that you're doing.
Yeah.
As opposed to, again, as I said, just kind of being passive about it, or just using it as a paycheck and kind of meandering the 9-to-5 job that you can technically turn a film career into. But I think it's about kind of
which is hard to
rejecting
believe.
that.
It was like, I it's hard to believe. But yeah, and I think just, it's an interesting analogy too, just, on many different levels, how, although I have never been to war, and so I would never try to presume that I would know what that experience is like. And so in no ways trying to diminish, that actual experience. But I think a lot of people use that analogy for what making a film is kind of like, whether it's, just pre-production, trying to get funding or trying to get hired, or, at every step actually making the film. I mean, it is kind of seems sometimes like you're just fighting against, nature itself almost. The creative process can really be a profoundly challenging one. And of course, it's profoundly rewarding. But and sometimes your fellow filmmakers feel like brothers and sisters in arms because it is such a challenge, But we can kind of bring that up in different ways over time. And it's also, I think, there's a lot of points of conflict maybe between your ideals, your integrity, and compromise,
even your vision,
that right, and of course, certainly one of the things that Herzog is known for, and he stands out for, and he's an inspiration to me, is his lack of compromise. However, I don't think that you could point to any one of his many films and say, "Oh, that was a compromised product."
It's never from a place of disrespect either, which is really admirable. It's always a mutual understanding of like, okay, you've got to do your job, I've got to do my job. How can we both get what we want out of this?
Well, or Herzog, but I think he's just he's an extraordinary example of of a person pursuing his vision endlessly. And I think that it's extraordinary. We don't have many filmmakers or many artists, period, like that, at least, that are widely known, because often it requires such great compromise, whether, whoever's paid for the film, your investors, the studio, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's just extremely difficult to make a film of any size without having just, thousands of points of significant compromise. So yeah, it's so that's why we picked it. It'd be interesting to know what other people's interpretations of Soldier of Cinema are. I'm sure that this is going to come back because it's such an interesting phrase that describes kind of an overall philosophy or theme. But let's go into some other things that Herzog discusses in these first couple lessons. And one of the big things he talks about is that he mentions he's self-taught. And pretty proud of that, I think. And he kind of just comes right out and says, he's like, I don't think that film school is worth it. It's expensive, and I think that you can, paraphrasing Herzog here, of course, but that you can kind of teach yourself everything that you need to know, at least logistically, to make a film in just a couple weeks. And after that, it's take the money that you would have spent on film school and spend that on making your own films. And a lot of other people think this too. But let's kind of discuss that for a minute. What do you think, Cullen? I mean, as somebody, you didn't go to like film school per se, but you went to a performing art school, and you teach film yourself in certain capacities. So, like, what are your thoughts on that, on Herzog's take here?
Yeah, I think it kind of allows you almost when you're not in. I think film schools are great. And what I always tell my students is that you can go and just look at what you learn, look at the curriculums, and look at things like that. And if you would learn something, then it has value. But I think that the benefit that at least I've found of not going to film school and I've never taken film in an educational environment or anything like that, is kind of the freedom to not have to worry about a lot of rules. And I don't mean safety rules. Of course, safety is always really important. But I mean more in terms of there's certain things that what I notice that film school is kind of trying to drill in the heads of the students, and it usually works. I can tell the difference almost 9 times out of 10 if I'm working with somebody who has a film school background versus someone who is self-taught.
Yeah.
And
like
not saying that one is better than the other, but I think that, you see a lot of this.
Give us some examples. Like, what would you, so give me an example, kind of like some things you feel like that really stand out that you can kind of tell immediately, like, oh, this person has gone to film school
even
versus...
something as simple as something like storyboarding. And I know a lot of people who come out of film school who don't storyboard, but I think that there's almost this kind of... academic take on something like if a shoot is, if you're improvising a shot, or if you're like, I'm not sure if that shot's actually going to work anymore or something like that, or you're changing things around. One thing I often hear is, from film school people is just like, oh, well, we should have storyboarded. Whereas I often find that kind of organic coming up with shots on the day, or looking at something and going, oh, that would be a great shot, let's change this to there, is actually something that makes films better rather than sticking to, like kind of like a Bible of production that you need this shot, then this shot, and this shot.
Right.
I find
so it's
that
kind of like maybe people who've gone to film school sometimes maybe get a little dogmatic in what they've been taught, perhaps. Yeah,
that's a good word for it.
I think I've seen that too. And it's it's probably. Yeah, it's interesting. There definitely, film school is often extremely expensive, and so that's certainly a very real practical consideration. I mean, I think a lot of people just flat out couldn't afford it, and I think you certainly. I mean, I don't think there's any question that you don't have to go to film school to become a filmmaker. So first and foremost, so if you're out there listening, by all means, I mean, don't feel like, I just want to say, do not feel like that this is going to be some kind of, obstacle that you're not going to be able to get past, that
like
you have to go to film school
kind of your career.
Right. That it's a make it or break it thing. I mean, please don't, because, especially in today's day and age with all of the, I mean, I do agree with Herzog. I think that from a logistical standpoint, right, from a technical standpoint, I do think that you can learn at least enough to start to get going and to make your own short films. I think that you can learn, right, with just some YouTube videos. There's so many, you can learn the basic fundamentals technologically of how to shoot something, and then you learn on the job. And then,
that's exactly what I was going to say is that people will often say the value of film school is that you're learning about like these professional environments. But every single time I've been on a set, or at least when I was starting to work on sets, there were no people that were unhappy to teach me something or to explain something to me. And, rather than paying tens of thousands of dollars to learn
or
that.
hundreds
I'm
of thousands,
being paid,
yeah.
and I'm being paid at that point to learn this stuff, which is great. And I think that, you know, there's even a huge difference I've noticed on sets of, and I've never run a bigger set. Like everything I've directed has always been very indie, very bare bones crew, which I love.
Yeah.
But every time I've worked on a bigger set, either as a DP or as a camera operator, I've noticed even when there are PAs, that the PAs that are at film school or were at film school are treated differently than the PAs who are self-taught. Not in a
really?
not in a negative way. Like, it's not like one of them is trashed on or anything like that. But you just notice that often the PAs that were at film school are sort of given more rigid guidelines and sort of said, you know, do this, whereas the PAs that weren't at film school are often kind of invited to tag along to bigger jobs that they might not be involved in. And things like that. Like, so that while the PAs that were at film school, and this actually is a direct example from a job I worked last year, the PAs that were at film school were all told to kind of set up all the interview spaces and, you know, get the bars up with the cloth and things like that, and the couches all set up.
Yeah.
And the PAs who, at this point I was a camera operator, I wasn't working as a PA, but the PAs who were not with that program from that film school, again, they were just kind of invited to tag along to different things and just kind of observe, and they didn't have to, you know, necessarily be working and actually setting things up at every waking moment. They were a lot more, I think, invited to just come on and observe the process and things like that, which was really interesting. I thought that was kind of a
well, I mean,
thing.
I think my experience, right? There's always a time and a place, but just a couple thoughts too. I mean, not to get too far sidetracked into like a how-to as opposed to kind of discussing Herzog's comments, but just real quickly, I mean, depending on where you live, I mean, there are a lot of opportunities to learn how to make film if you've not been to film school. Some of them seem a little obvious, maybe more so than others, but I mean, obviously, you grab a camera any which way you can and start to make your own films. There are so many resources online. It's just almost even, it's tough. There's almost too many, but certainly you can pick up the bare bones kind of minimal stuff. But, like you said, I mean, go be a PA. There's, even if it's a small production in your town, go shadow somebody. People are usually really open to, if you're professional, if you're polite, if you're kind, if you're courteous, if you're not pushy, and you ask in the right time and place and way, there definitely, you can find people out there who will allow you to shadow them.
Yep, there's no harm in asking. That's kind of what I learned.
And it's a trade-off, right? I mean, you can go work for free on a production in order to basically consider yourself an intern in order to learn. I mean, I've done that myself. I mean, even after I kind of had a career and had done stuff, I would offer myself up to be a camera assistant, for example, for a couple times so that I could learn how to operate a specific type of camera. In this case happened to be a red, and I was really curious about using certain type of lenses, which they had. And so, I was like, well, hey, I'll carry your crap and kind of be a camera assistant here so that I can learn some of this stuff. But other ways too you can learn that aren't maybe as obvious is kind of go in a different role. I remember when I was first starting out, now I was pursuing acting, so it was, felt a little bit more in line, but I ended up learning a lot more about what the crew did than I did about acting as a background actor. And so I would, I did this for a few months. I wouldn't suggest doing it for very long because there's, definitely a law of diminishing returns, but for a handful of times, that was a way that I could get on a totally, I mean, the biggest sets out there. I mean, we're talking major studio feature films, major studio television shows. I'm standing right there watching the actors work, watching the crew work, and what you're able to learn about the hierarchy of who does what and how to say, I mean, it was extraordinary what I could learn, and I'm being paid to do it. And because, it's like you're standing around doing nothing 99% of the time when you're a background performer. Performer's a stretch, but, when you're in background. But you can learn so much if you just pay attention. So
I think, and sort of in line with Herzog's philosophy, too, I think that my personal take on us all, too, is like, even if I wasn't making money in any of this, I would still be doing it.
Yeah.
I'm really lucky to be able to make money doing this and to be doing what I love. And even, I had no dreams that I would be working even on indie sets as a cinematographer as quickly as I did. And I was really lucky to have gotten there, faster than a lot of people do get there. But I think that even if I wasn't making money, even if I wasn't doing that as a job, I would, absolutely still be making movies on my own. As even at a loss, I would be doing. And most of the things that I've made thus far have been at a loss. They're there because I liked to do them, and especially with personal projects and things like that. Like, I'm not selling these to any big studios and getting royalties back or anything like that. I usually just release them online for free because I don't really care about making a huge paycheck off of my own things at this point. When I can do that, that'll be great. But at the moment, it's just one of those things that I'm like, I'm doing it because I love it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, for sure. And maybe that's part of a little bit of what it means to be a soldier of cinema, to work through those tough times. But, there are lessons further down the road here where Herzog does talk about, financing projects and developing a career. And we can kind of definitely dive more into those topics when we get there. But, another thing that Herzog mentions in this lesson is, it's crazy to think about. I mean, it's so interesting to think. He talks about how, he grew up in the middle of the Bavarian Alps, and he didn't see a film until he was 11, which is extraordinary. Of course, like most of you listening here, myself included, and you too, Cullen. I mean, we've been so steeped in film and television, from our most infantile times, probably. I mean, it's hard to even imagine, and that's probably a big part of why his voice is so singular and unique, because he wasn't steeped in so much of that. Yeah, but Herzog recommends watching films, which is, and we're going to find that this happens with great regularity with Herzog. He kind of says, like, well, hey, I didn't see films until I was 11. And then he's like, I suggest you watch films to learn how to make films. It's kind of a funny irony, a little bit, but Herzog talks about, watching films to learn. And he uses a specific film in that lesson, Viva Zapata, as an example. He kind of just showcases, he's like, hey, here's a great example of of a character introduction of Marlon Brando's character in that film. And he kind of walks through that opening scene there. A little bit of, for you, how important was that, watching other films? Was that a big part of your inspiration? Do you feel like it was a big part of your learning?
By process of osmosis, absolutely. Like, even if you're not actually actively watching films to learn something from them, you're just going to take inspiration from the things that you like. But I also, on a flip side of that, I don't watch that many movies, strangely enough. I don't...
like
probably
now
average,
or kind of ever?
Well, I mean, average before quarantine, I would say, was about maybe twice a week. And now it's probably one every 2 weeks. And I think that's just because I've been trying to films. And I think that's because I've been trying to create a lot and been trying to kind of get things down on the page.
What about when you were young? Do you have an indication? Like, were you like a film fiend when you were little?
I was definitely. I was the type of person that would watch. I would watch the entirety of Lord of the Rings, and then I would watch the 50 hours of behind the scenes of the Lord of the Rings movies afterwards. And
Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. I mean, that was insane, but same with Jaws. Like, I would watch Jaws, and then I would watch the entire behind the scenes making of. I would watch every facet of those things. Even when I had, I remember one of the earlier things I had was the Star Wars special editions on VHS.
Nice.
And those ones were the ones where you couldn't just select obviously no menus on VHS. So
right.
You would have to watch the whole movie, and then after the credits rolled, you would get the behind the scenes kind of special edition.
That's awesome.
Making ofs and things like that. So I remember doing that. And I think, honestly, if you looked at those tapes, the parts of the tapes that would be completely worn down would be the parts of the special, like the making ofs. Because I would watch those over and over, and watching it, in Empire Strikes Back, them going to, I think it was Norway, and being on location. It was just it was like watching Indiana Jones and realizing that you could be Indiana Jones without really the danger of it. That as a director, you could go and still live out all these experiences.
Yeah.
But you're there, and you're getting paid, and you're making something that's
right.
Really
that it's
great.
Actually like an art and a craft, and could potentially be a profession. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and Herzog talks about that too, and about how he kind of first realized that film that there was an artifice, that it was fake. That he mentions that he noticed that the exact same footage was used a couple times in a film, and he's like, wait a minute, I just saw that that same guy fall off that whatever it was, and that was kind of like an awakening awakening for him. Like, oh, wait a minute, this is a crafted thing. This is kind, and it's so interesting that you talk about, when you were young, having access to all of these behind the scenes, featurettes and the making ofs and director's commentaries and things. Of course, people of my generation, we didn't have any of that. So, that all of the kind of infrastructure of info. I mean, everybody knows what IMDb is now. Everybody knows box office reports. Everybody there's so much making of, and that's just part of the marketing of films now, is kind of the story of how they're made. I mean, some of my favorite films, it's like, I pop in my Alien DVD or Blu-ray, and there's the film is 2 hours long, and there's like 8 hours of features, documentaries, right? It's like mind blowing. But we, like a lot of people, like myself, generation, we didn't have any of that, and I'm curious. Like, I don't have any specific recollection like Herzog does of when I realized that filmmaking was a thing that professional people did, and this was actually a career, and there were actors and there were directors, and all this kind of. I can't really remember when that was. But I am definitely a fan of that making of content like you are.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because I've heard, like, even Peter, to go back to Lord of the Rings, but Peter Jackson basically has said that, you don't why go to film school when you've essentially got a 25-hour film school in the making of those DVDs, right? Like, you go through every single facet of the production of those movies.
That's a really great point, and it's so there is just another resource that people have today that they didn't have before, and some of these commentaries, some of these making ofs are definitely more useful than others, and for different reasons, but absolutely, especially, go find your favorite films, find films that really speak to you, that touch you, and see if there's a director commentary or a making of, and a lot of times these may even be on YouTube or other places online, if not definitely on the DVD or Blu-ray or UHD discs, and some of them are extraordinarily insightful. So yeah, good point. Another great resource. It's interesting. I don't know if there's any way we could really, come to any true understanding of it, but I wonder if that makes any difference. The generations younger who grew up just almost since birth, steeped in this making of content, versus people who didn't have any access to this, and we had to kind of figure out our own, like, what was going on. I definitely feel like it kept the creative process a mystery for me until much, much later in life. I do remember thinking, like, these aren't even like real human beings. Like, what is this magic? Not literally, but I mean, like, who are these people?
Well, it's like Herzog says about the guy falling off the cliff, and then in a later battle scene, he falls off the cliff again, and it's this realization of, like, oh, there's something being manipulated here. This isn't just real.
Or I just meant, like, there's that, but it was just like, I guess what I was trying to say is that it took me so much later in life to realize that this was something that maybe I could do. Because it didn't seem like real people. I mean, I grew up in Missouri. I grew up in the Midwest to non-artistic parents. I mean, it was, so that's part of it there. But I mean, it was like, maybe, I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering out loud. It's like, I wonder if had I been exposed to, to these making ofs, more of this stuff, I'd be like, oh yeah, they're just people. Like, these are just like normal people like anybody else, and this is just a job, basically, But yeah, I mean, it just seemed like such a mystery to me for so long, and I think that some of that even kind of sticks with me to this day, where I'm like, I hold the process in such kind of awe. I'm in such awe of it. Films that I really, really love. I mean, Herzog even kind of, in his films, I'm just like, wow, dude, just a little
just like, how did they pull this off?
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? It's like, obviously, there's no like right or wrong answer, but what do you think? Just having grown up with all that stuff.
To go back to Jaws, I think that Jaws was the first time that I ever was affected by a movie subconsciously. That, like, I got out of watching Jaws, and I didn't want to slip out of bed because I thought I was going to slip into the ocean. And to get over that fear,
I love it.
But to get over that fear, I went and I watched all the making of it. I was probably 6, I want to say 6 or 7 at the time.
Oh wow!
And I just sat down and watched the entire making of the movie, and then suddenly the movie wasn't scary for me anymore. Suddenly it was,
Yeah.
watching that movie, and there's frightening scenes in it, of course, that still affected me and still do to this day. But the movie itself wasn't this thing that was creeping into my real life. Now it was something that I was like, how do I get into that position where I can scare people and I can get into, to making a giant shark? And a lot of that for me was actually, it came in through stop motion, because I had kind of unlimited budgets when you think about that. It's very similar to people who do, other types of animation, is that, or even something like writing a book, is that you don't really have a budget for those things. You can do whatever you want. So I had all these Lego sets, and suddenly, I had a dinosaur battle in my movie, whereas that would cost millions and millions of dollars to do on a real set. I had these little Lego things that I could play around with. And,
there you go. And all the time in the world. And imagination and
it
some
taught me
Legos.
also the kind of the hardships of it too, because it's the amount of times that the T-Rex's head would fall off or something like that. And I kind of learned how difficult it is kind of logistically to make these things. But no, I think kind of to more answer your question, I think that what it did for me is it set up a real expectation and quite an accurate expectation about what it's like to be on those sets. The one really great thing about a lot of those behind the scenes making of content things is that they usually don't sugarcoat things. If something goes wrong, it's usually kind of, if anything, the focus of those documentaries, as opposed to a lot of other things that kind of just show you the happy side of it, or just show you the everyone cheering along and being happy together and singing Kumbaya.
Because those documentaries are kind of trying to tell their own story, right? There's no story if there's no conflict. So that's an interesting point. So it sounds like maybe you felt like those things kind of gave you a more realistic expectation that, like,
for sure,
it's hard. This is like hard work, just like anything else. I mean, yeah, interesting, man. Hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I mean, it really, I think, prepared me in that kind of weird way to be like, I know, even on a very basic level of just set procedure of, like, you learn why the clapperboard is there. You learn why, what's the boom operator doing while people are setting up the lights and things like that. And you just kind of learn this whole...
And it's like tedium. I mean, I think it's like I think that's even Herzog mentions this. I mean, it's clear that Herzog, this is what he's spent his entire life doing. It's just clearly his passion. And even he's like, God, filmmaking can be such profound tedium. It's like mind numbing. I've literally heard him describe it that way. And God, I mean, if anybody's been on a set, it's like it really can. I mean, it can be just
grinding.
Grinding. I mean, just grinding. So it's, that's interesting. So yeah, I mean, I think that's, so you were kind of exposed to more of the realities of filmmaking at a much younger age. And, it frankly, to be honest, I didn't have any exposure to that or understanding of it until much, much, much later in life. I mean, probably didn't really get, an accurate gist of that until I actually started, being on sets, and it was like, oh my gosh, wait. Well, then a little bit of action. Wait.
Yeah, you just kind of, I've got a kind of funny anecdote too, that I watched George Méliès at a very young age, like the Voyage to the Moon and stuff. And, as many people might know, George Méliès was a magician. And so that's kind of always how I thought of film, like ever since I was a really young kid, was that it's essentially
illusions.
It's an optical illusion. It is like we are the magicians going out and creating these magic shows, and that's one of, and same way, I've never really been super into magic. Like, it's not like I was never like one of those kids that would pull out cards and do card tricks and things like that. But I've always been more interested, if anything, in pulling back that curtain and learning how those tricks are done, and in very much the same way. That was kind of where my interest lied in film.
Interesting. Yeah. So yeah. Well, and so like we mentioned, these can be powerful inspirations, powerful tools of education and information. I'm just curious, like, what were a handful of like those films that were the biggest inspirations to you? Do you kind of remember that?
Totally,
Herzog mentions a couple of his, but I'm just curious, kind of what do you feel like, or were a handful of the films that were most inspirational to you as a kid, where you were like, I want to do this?
Pretty much all of Hitchcock's big ones, Psycho, North by
As a
Northwest,
kid?
Vertigo. Yeah, I mean, my dad was a big
Wow.
Hitchcock fan, so I watched a lot of those as a pretty
Cool.
young kid. North by
Okay.
Northwest, everything like that. Rear Window.
You're not
was
trying to
like my
sound fancy here now, are you?
No. I
Cullen?
remember
Okay.
Rear Window was like my favorite movie as a kid. And
Wow.
that was that movie. And I just made a Rear Window parody just a few months ago. So there you go. But
I mean, that's extraordinary. I feel like as a kid, I probably would have been so profoundly bored by that film. I mean, just to be to be perfectly honest, I don't think that I had the patience or attention to.
I think it was the
been...
hyping up my dad did. My dad would always talk about these movies as though they were like terrifying. So I couldn't be bored because I was just waiting for the next scary moment in them and thinking at all times that I was going to be horrified. So, especially with Psycho and things like that.
Yeah. So Hitchcock's larger films, but what else were some? It's Jaws. You mentioned Jaws already.
Jaws, Jaws. I mean, as I said, Jaws was kind of the first time I was ever really actively involved, like scared by a movie beyond just the screening that I kind of
like
realized that you could. Yeah, and I had no understanding of why that was, but it was something that even just in a really young age, you still sort of get that in your head that you can. Like, oh, they did something to me, even if I can't put it into words as to why.
Yeah.
Jaws, I loved a lot of old westerns, things like a lot of John Ford's, and
oh wow,
again, my dad was born in 1955, so that's kind of what he grew up with.
Right.
So I think that's likely why a lot of that was passed on to me.
Very cool.
And things like A Bridge Too Far, like I was obsessed with war movies as a kid too. I remember one of the first bigger movies that I made with a friend was we made this stop motion D-Day movie about, and we used the little plastic army men and stuff like that. And we had these sweeping battle shots where my friend would be zooming in on the little figures dying, and I would be pouring tomato sauce on them and things like that. So, but it was again, even then, it was like it was an illusion because he would pan the camera to the left, and I would run to all the figures on the right and knock a few of them over and pour the stuff over, and then he would pan back to the right, and I'd run around the camera and all the things that were off screen. So again, it was like a magic show where you're showing, you're not showing the trick, you're just being kind of revealing.
Yeah, I think that's a really it's a very interesting and I think accurate analogy to make. And cinema is definitely illusion. There's no question to that. And often, hopefully, it's quite magical. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. That Herzog, it's and older Spielberg flick. That even though you're much younger than me, your inspirations are films that were, because they were kind of passed down from your father, that they're older films. Interesting. I think, like, for me, my inspirations were, I grew up in the 80s mostly, but I was born in 76. So Jaws would be a great example too. So Spielberg's earlier stuff. I kind of had a not as highfalutin inspirations as yours. I kind of was raised on a lot of genre flicks. So, like your father was watching, Hitchcock and John Ford. My father was watching Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and Mad Max.
Those are a lot of fun.
And Mad Max and The Road Warrior and Poltergeist and these kind of films. I grew later to really appreciate Hitchcock and some of these other. But yeah, I kind of grew up and was inspired by a lot of genre B picks. But specifically Mad Max and The Road Warrior, those were two films that really, really stood out in my mind as just the physicality of those films. And I think that's something that I really enjoy about Herzog's films, is that his films are very physical. And, I just want to make a quick, it's like, well, who cares? We could kind of get off on all kinds of topics. But, one of the things that Herzog mentions consistently is that, he explains why people are like, why in the world did you drag that ship over the mountain in Fitzcarraldo? Like, why in the world would you do that? And explaining his motivations for that and explaining many other of his motivations, he says, because I want people to be able to believe their eyes. People can't believe their eyes anymore when you're watching like a Lord of the Rings, for example, or any other number of films, all of the Marvel movies. You can't believe your eyes. Everything is fake. Everything is fake in these films. I mean, everything. And I think that's, obviously I wasn't able to articulate it, but as a kid, Mad Max and especially The Road Warrior, you could believe your eyes.
And they're tangible, right?
They're real, but it's like you really know this is happening.
Yeah,
These are
feel
real people. They're moving at speed. These are real people. They are actually performing these stunts. This is really happening. And there is just something, and we can go into this, later when Herzog kind of talks about this more in other lessons. But I think there is a very significant real impact. And I think that there is definitely something there. The difference between being able to believe your eyes and really... and not being able to believe your eyes, right? It's like, to take it back to this magic analogy, right? It's like if you've got a magician performing tricks in front of you and you're just like, I can see the trick. I know what you're doing. You're completely removed. There's like no immersion. Right? I mean, that's kind of the point. If you already know how the trick's done, or they are not good magicians and you can see how the trick is being done, it's not really magic, is it? It's not very entertaining.
It's an illusion show.
But if the magician is extraordinary and you're sitting there in front of them, and yes, it's magic. Like that they're not actually really manipulating time and space and breaking the laws of physics, but you can't figure it out. It's like they're really doing it. The physicality of that, of like, wow, whatever they're doing is so exceptional. I cannot, this is like real. I don't know, because obviously it's like, it's a film. This isn't really a post-apocalyptic world where there's no gasoline and people are, killing each other over a drop of gas. That's not real. But within that, what they're doing is real and visceral and physical and tangible. So I think that's one of the things that really stands out for me for Herzog's films that kind of draws me to them. But
yeah, oh, totally.
Yeah. So, Herzog talks about, this is kind of interesting, right? Because this could be pretty subjective. He talks about, consuming good film, and we just use kind of some examples here, right? I mean, your example of Herzog and Jaws, my example of George Miller and Mad Max, and what do you think good cinema is? Now, it's totally subjective, of course, but Herzog's talking about exposing yourself to good cinema. Do you think that what meaning do you think that has? Is there any objective meaning to that?
I mean, I kind of get two, not to say that everything can be organized into those two meanings, but on one hand, it's something that is not necessarily critically acclaimed, but well regarded, well received. Something like a Godfather that is very clearly, everyone kind of agrees.
It's like in the canon.
Yeah, that's a good classic movie. And the other time would be, I would say, really anything that you can learn from. Like I've had great experiences watching some movies that aren't necessarily the best. Like Ed Wood, I love Ed Wood, and a lot of his movies.
Movie.
Yeah,
I think that. Oh, you
no, but I mean even
not
not the Tim. Yeah. I do love the Tim Burton one.
Okay, gotcha. So actual Ed Wood's actual films that he directed. Yeah,
exactly. And I find that those are so interesting, is it's basically just watching this dude that has such a passion, but he's so misguided in so many ways, and you kind of learn, okay, what could I have done differently? What could I, and things like that, which I think is really, really valuable for.
So you can learn from films that aren't technically, I guess, great, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I think that's an interesting point. I think you can. I think, so that would maybe be a little bit where we might differ from Herzog's comments here, but I agree. I mean, I think good cinema exists everywhere. Mm-hmm. I think that good cinema can exist in a genre flick. Good cinema can exist in a studio film. Good cinema can exist in any country, in any language, in any era. Good is certainly subjective. I think ultimately, what speaks to you.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's but I think you're right though. I mean, I think it's worth, even if you have to kind of push yourself, especially today, it's so easy to do so with, all of these, Netflix, Hulu, Criterion Collection is online, all of these different resources. I think it is good to push yourself past maybe just what you've been watching. You can
get burnt out real fast too. I think that's the thing when you just watch like a list,
type,
your list of just like, oh, I want to see this, throwing something different in the mix can be a really lovely surprise and really refreshing.
try different genres, try different eras, try different, countries, try different, push yourself. I mean, I have to do this a little bit. It's like I think all of us, or most of us, probably kind of fall back into the things that are our comfort zone, so to speak. It's like, well, I know that I love this genre, or I know I love this director, or I maybe don't like to read subtitles, or whatever your thing is. I think it's really a good thing to at least occasionally push yourself and go watch some other films. I think you can learn so much from watching some silent era films. You can learn so much from watching foreign language films. You can learn so much from watching, So, absolutely. I think, I think it's like watching with a conscious intent, is an important aspect.
Another aspect to kind of talk a little bit about something else that Herzog says in his opening lesson is this universality and these universal rules of film. And I think that watching films from different genres, watching films in different countries are a great way to introduce yourself into like, what are universal rules and what do they mean?
Good point.
I can watch a movie in Japan and I can watch a movie made in Texas, and I can mute them both, and I can still understand what's going on if the filmmaker is visually minded and kind of is great at visual storytelling. And there's universal rules there that carry off internationally in any movie. And
there's some that do and some that don't. Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. It's a really good point, is to kind of see, and that's watching films from different eras, everything from different, the grammar or language of film has been solidified for the most part for quite a while, but there are definite differences. And you go back in time and you see not only differences in acting style, but you see different philosophies of storytelling. You see different camera subjectivity, different editing. And so, I mean, that's a good point, to kind of compare different films from different countries, different languages, different eras, and kind of see what is universal amongst these things and what isn't. So really good point. And I think you mentioned that you can kind of watch and absorb through osmosis, and you can also, what I often do is I'll kind of my first watch of a film will be like that exactly. I'm just an audience. I'm just hanging out here. I want to be entertained. I want to get sucked into the film. And if it's a film that stands out to me for whatever reason, then I think, I go back and I watch it. Okay, I want to kind of break down here. Let's see what they're doing. What did they do that made me feel this way, or what stood out to me, and kind of just analyze it on a different level. So you can always do that too. You can enjoy a film on multiple levels.
And perhaps to kind of even, if anything, kind of wrap up all the conversation or all the topics we've had. I've actually heard people that I know who went to film school whose teachers told them, I always advise reading this script or the screenplay before you watch the movie, which is bizarre to me, which is completely the antithesis of anything you should be doing, because you should be watching the movies as the directors intended, and then if you want to do the research afterwards. But to give yourself a preconceived notion, or to give yourself, this
that is interesting.
Entirely
That's
different.
Weird.
Yeah, it's really, and I've heard it from multiple people from multiple different film schools, and it's like, why on earth? I can't think of any positive.
Maybe somebody listening can kind of give us, shoot us an email and let us know why that is. I mean, I have often read a script after. Many times I've read a script afterward, but I don't think I've ever read a script prior.
No, me neither. In fact, I would be actively avoiding doing so if I saw a screenplay from a movie. And
I remember when Hateful Eight script was leaked before the film came out, and I was like, don't even get me close to that. Yeah. It's like the last thing in the world I want is to have the film ruined for me because I've read the script beforehand. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, did we miss anything else that Herzog covered there in those first couple lessons? I think we pretty much touched on almost everything, man.
Yeah.
It is, I just want to go back quickly because he uses a specific example I think is really helpful. It's funny. He kind of is not making fun of, but kind of calling out. He's like, I talk to a lot of film students, and he's like, they think film history started at Star Wars.
Yeah.
What is that? 77? Is it 77? Star Wars. Yeah. And it's so amazing to me to think. I mean, first of all, I'm old, so Star Wars is within my lifetime, just barely. But so it's hysterical to think that people, kind of might have this thought that film history started in '77. But I guess it's possible.
I mean, that's the irony there, is that film is very old, but also very new, which is kind of it's an interesting art for that reason, that you can literally go back to, a Western made in 1902 was technically a contemporary movie then. It wasn't set in the Old West, it was set in present day for them, which I always talk about why the Western to me is such an interesting genre to go through, because you literally essentially go through modern iterations of life in the West that are being recorded in real time, and then you get up to this romanticized vision of the frontier and all that. But that's another conversation for another conversation.
But you're right. I mean, I think in overall perspective, film is a pretty young art form.
Yes,
when you compare it to music and painting, sculpture, writing, of course, those art forms have been around for much longer than moving pictures.
And if anything, that's why you should try to expose yourself to all of it, because it's not really that difficult to do.
Yeah, it's not impossible.
It's not hard to really go back in time and examine older movies. There's not,
absolutely,
it's not that long ago.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've just about covered most of the major topics that Herzog himself covered in these first couple lessons of Masterclass. So we will go ahead and wrap it up now, and we'll cover the next couple lessons in our next episode. But Cullen, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I had a blast, and I'm looking forward to our future episodes, and I'm excited to see what kind of feedback we get from this. And I hope you listening out there enjoyed it. And we'll look forward to hanging out with you next time, man.
Yeah, see you guys.
All right. Until then, signing off.